Hi everyone, this is Mr. Aguilar. I hope you're all doing well. I thought I would record our PowerPoint this time rather than just sending it to you. Hopefully it'll help us understand it a little better. We're going to be switching chapters now. Next chapter is the Aztec Empire, located in Central America and what is now modern-day Mexico. Um, our essential question today will be, who were the Aztecs and how does their society compare to our own? You're going to want to use the attached Cornell notes to fill in as I'm going through the PowerPoint. Then you could type in your own answers and submit it on Google Classroom. You can email it to me or you can even share it with me, whatever is easiest for you. So we're going to start by looking at, it'll be the first box on your Cornell notes. It would say, what are the origins of the Aztec Empire? How did it begin? Around 1324, a group of people called the Mexica or the Mexica people were walking around what is now modern day Mexico, looking for a new place to kind of start their new capital city. And like many times in history, we've heard that visions have impacted a lot of decisions. So the people had a vision that told them to look for an eagle holding a snake in its mouth standing on a cactus. And so as the Mexica people were walking through their land, they actually seen this. And so they decided to start building their capital city right there. Actually, what is modern day Mexico City today. At this time, sorry, we'll get to the next slide. So they see this eagle and they create the city. And if you're looking at the bottom right screen right here, the bottom corner screen, you'll see what is now modern day Mexico. And many of us have probably visited. I haven't been in a few years, but we're going to see what it was like about 700 years ago with the Aztecs. Before we move on, though, if you know the first question here, you don't have to write this down in your notes, just something to think about, is what country is this flag from? Give you a couple seconds. If you're not sure, this flag is from Mexico. If you said Mexico, that's correct. And how does this image help explain the origins of the Aztec people? Specifically the picture in the middle. Right, so if you're thinking about something along the lines of, well, this actually has the eagle with the eagle holding the snake in its mouth and he's still standing on a cactus, which references the original Mexica people that originally settled in Mexico City. So where was the Aztec Empire located? Well, the capital city was called Tenochtitlan. Sorry if I butchered that. What is now modern day Mexico City. And it was actually built on a lake. So when they seen the vision of the eagle holding the snake on a cactus, it was on a little island in the middle of the lake called Lake Texcoco. They decided to still build there. And so this required a lot of, if you could see on the bottom left picture, a lot of engineering. The bridges were actually able to move. They made these levees to hold the water out of the city so it didn't sink. And they even built a lot of great aqueducts, which we know what those are by now, right? They brought in a lot of fresh water from the mountains. The spring water came in, they brought it into their city. And if you look at the bottom two pictures, it's comparing. On the left side was the original Tenochtitlan in the 1400s, what the Aztec Empire's capital city might have looked like. And on the right side is Mexico City present day. And so you can see the lake has since dried up, and over the hundreds of years it's been filled in, and actually now it's starting to sink because the waters, they're draining whatever little water's left, they're starting to drain it. All right, so this you can see how much it's kind of changed, but kind of still looks the same from a few hundred years ago. Aztec society, which was divided into 5 social classes, and we've talked about social classes a lot throughout the year, particularly a hierarchy or a hierarchical class structure with the least amount of power at the bottom of the pyramid, and whoever's at the top has the most amount of power. And so I'm not going to get into too much detail. We're going to talk more about this next week. But at the very top, you have the ruler, also called it, I'm going to say this wrong, Tlatoani, who the most interesting thing about the ruler is that it was not hereditary. It wasn't patrilineal or matrilineal. Actually, if the ruler died, there was a council who kind of decided who would be the next emperor. A lot different than maybe what we've seen in Europe and in Africa. Right below the rulers, you have the government officials who ruled little sections of the empire. They also collected taxes, so not a lot of people liked them, but they're very wealthy. Right below those officials, you have commoners, who people weren't that not necessarily that poor, but they were like skilled workers. They're traders, craftspeople, stuff like that. The biggest population, one of the biggest populations, is the peasants, and peasants were they were basically hired by the nobles or by the priests or commoners to do work for them. They made little money, and right below that, on the very bottom, we have slaves. And slaves, it was not the same as we would think about it today. This type of slavery was not hereditary, so you weren't born into slavery. Most slaves became slaves because they couldn't pay debt, or yeah, mainly because they couldn't pay debt. And one of the most fascinating things about Aztec class structure at this time was that your status was not fixed. So meaning if you were a peasant, you didn't have to stay a peasant your whole life. You could actually work hard enough or get lucky enough and be able to become maybe a commoner, maybe even a government official. And that also goes for slaves. You are not going to be a slave your entire life, just depending on how much you owed, and then a little bit of luck as well. Types of food. So what do we're going to look at the types of food that Aztecs ate. Mainly, they grew a lot of crops, and some of this a lot of it actually might look familiar. It's peppers, tomatoes, squash, sage. Actually, we burn a lot of sage now too. Sweet potatoes and avocados. I'm sure many of us eat that same food today. But let's look at this picture. Um, on the left side, it asks, what does this picture reveal was the most important crop to the Aztecs? If you see, we can see the picture in the background. Most important crop, of course, was maize or corn, very similar to the Mayans as well. And what are some things that you think the Aztecs could make out of out of corn? Or even what do we make out of corn today? And if you've already looked at the last bullet point, you've seen some of that stuff. Things like tamales, tortillas, porridge. Aztecs made this was a huge part of their diet. I'm sure many of us still eat them today. I know I do. I think I even had some tortillas earlier today. And on the right side of the picture, this is an early market, a sort of a little trading center in Tenochtitlan. Looks like very similar to a lot of marketplaces we've studied this year. Ones in Africa, such as in Timbuktu with Mansa Musa, or maybe even in Europe with the feudal lords and the marketplaces there as well. Aztec religion is very similar to Mayan. If you looked at the Mayan notes, they are polytheistic. They believed in many gods. They believed many parts of nature had its own god, and that they needed these gods to survive. And that if they had a good harvest or they had good weather, it was because they were being rewarded from the gods. But they would sense earthquakes or floods or lightning and thunderstorms, things like that, if they felt the gods were upset. And so the way to keep the gods happy, they felt, was to sacrifice both animal and humans. That if you sacrificed human and animal blood, that the gods would stay happy and it would give the gods strength, which in turn would grant good harvests and good weather to the Aztecs themselves. And what do they do for fun? Of course, very similar to the Mayans as well. Aztecs danced, listened to music. They played many games. Depending on how wealthy you were or how poor you were, you played different games. One of the most popular board games, if not the most popular board game, was called Potoli. And one of the most fascinating things about Potoli, it's like a board game like we play today. They use like beans to keep your count, but anybody could play this game. If you were the richest or the poorest person, everybody played it. So that's kind of cool. The most popular ball game, though, among nobles, among wealthy people, was called, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, Tlachtli, and it looks very similar to the game of Poketop from the Mayans that we looked at on a few videos ago. If you watched it, and you had to get this concrete ball through the concrete hoop on top here without using your hands or your feet. So there's some similarities I see between maybe like soccer, even like baseball, except you have to use like your elbows and your shoulders to try to get it through the hoop. All right. All right, guys, so that's it for the Aztecs today. Go ahead, and if you need to pause it or rewind it, go ahead and go through that so we can fill out our Cornell notes, okay? And we'll submit them on Google Classroom. All right, guys, take care.